Patricia O'Connor and Frida Reba Darcy here today on the Bonsai balcony. We have another beautiful day. It's a little breezy today. I think you can see some of our needles blowing around there, and the needles on the trees just outside our balcony. They're ruffling, and the birds are playing the currents out there on another cloudless, hard blue, beautiful day in Alameda, California. Yesterday, we were out here doing this same kind of gig, and we had a question as to what we were going to do. We had said yesterday that we saw powdery mildew come up. I'm just running around. I know. I was pulling weeds. To repeat the story, I was pulling clover, and it was thick. I had just pulled clover not even a month ago, and it had already bounced back so much. And while I was pulling clover, a couple of observations. One, it stays wet because it's down there low where I'll water the tree. Two, some of it looked a little gray, which I wasn't concerned with because to me, it's a weed or a parasite at that point. The definition, I think, of a weed is anything growing in the wrong spot, I believe, is what I remember. So I'm pulling weeds, and I'm noticing that they're not healthy, and that only concerns me because that tells me that if I allow those weeds to continue, they will transfer their ill health to my desirable trees. So that gray was PM, powdery mildew. Now, I used to grow perennials, or I used to grow things that are seasonal and would die every winter. It would die every winter, would die at the end of summer. They would bloom, produce some fruit, and then die, or flowers and then die. And powdery mildew would typically be one of the things that would take over a plant that had that was in a flowering state or fruit making state, because they are transferring their energy towards making the fruit and their defenses less on their own defenses. And so after harvest, you would see a lot of plants that look spent from the year that started out so green and vital, and at the end of the season they look spent. And quite often you would have to take countermeasures to protect these plants from spider mites, powdery mildew, aphids, ants, which people will tell you that ants are harmless to plants. They're not. They actually farm aphids and will place them on your plants and then come down and treat them like dairy cattle, basically. So when you see ants going up and down your plants, look for aphids. They're probably there somewhere. That's what they're doing there. So with that little conversation about possible critters and what I've had to deal with in the past, I've had a few countermeasures that I like to use. I always had cats and dogs in the house somewhere, and I also had other living things that we didn't, that we're not looking to hurt anything necessarily. So countermeasures that wouldn't be hostile to outside life were always preferable. So I tended to go with Neem, Neem, Neem. And Neem is that funny smell that you sometimes smell when you go to a nursery. It, I believe, comes from a bean from palm trees, and it leaves leaves looking very waxy and clean. It's a great way to clean something that looks dirty when it comes to leaves. It leaves them looking shiny and healthy and stuff. They tend to like it when done in the right concentrations. More on that later. But So yesterday, while pulling weeds here, I saw a little cloud of dust coming up, but I'd already noticed that there was powdery mildew on some of the clover that I was pulling. You can't hardly see any clover now because I got most of it yesterday. Mostly all we see now is starweed or whatever this stuff is. But having seen that, I watched that kind of wash through there, and I'm going, you just released billions of spores of powdery mildew in these maples. And these maples, like the perennials that I was talking about earlier, these guys start off looking strong, looking really pretty and healthy. And by the end of the year, they're looking a little tired. And if they get water on the leaves that doesn't evaporate right away, it gets powdery mildew and they start looking. Those leaves cannot tolerate powdery mildew for even a half day. I mean, they're wasted by it. So every year it's kind of a challenge to see how long we can keep these guys going. So what I will typically do is I would have a bottle hanging right here. It's typically my Febreze bottle. I just use a Febreze bottle instead of bringing home a decent sprayer bottle. Because I've been using the Febreze bottle long enough, I will always remember that there is Neem in there. I won't go hosing something that needs water with Neem because I grabbed the wrong bottle that has said Neem to me for so long that I don't want to change my MO. Elsewise, I will go Neeming things I don't mean to. So that's kind of one key to it. Know what you're doing and kind of keep it foolproof if you can. Last year I had a big problem with powdery mildew on this cork oak. What happens is towards the end of the summer, the tree was flushing out a lot of stuff like mad, but flushing out and also shedding some of the earlier summer's leaves. And as it was exchanging those leaves, the leaves that were brown on the tree that would have flicked themselves off in a day or two were susceptible to getting powdery mildew and then giving that to the other foliage around it. Also, I had been doing my working on the ramification for this tree, and as you see, it's getting thicker and thicker and thicker in there, and that can lead to less air circulation, which also will lend itself to powdery mildew once it starts spreading to the plant. So you get it on those dead leaves that haven't fallen off yet. That spreads to the living stuff, which is all nicely condensed and stuff. If it gets a little rain or something, maybe it won't all dry right away because of all of that. Next thing you know, your oak has powdery mildew. And the last 2 years of viprication that you've got starts dying off in small chunks, and that's really kind of disturbing. So I grabbed my Neem bottle and I hosed that thing down to, oh holy heaven, knowing that we had done some really good work on this tree in the last couple of years and wanting to preserve all of that. Neem had always been my go-to product, and probably was this time too. But as far back as I've been using Neem, I've also been experimenting with other things, like peroxide. A very small percentage of peroxide mixed with tap water will also get rid of powdery mildew. It's as effective at getting rid of powdery mildew. You have to use it in a small concentration, and one drawback to that is that when peroxide and water dries, to me, it looks like powdery mildew. So I would go back and double dose something that I've already treated when I should be moving on. And you can definitely start coating more and more dried peroxide on your leaves, all the while thinking that your powdery mildew is getting out of hand, when really you're just causing issues that you shouldn't have had. That's actually happened to me before in the past life with the perennials. So I would say that for some people, peroxide would be a great alternative if they're better at recognizing one over the other than I'd been. So I'm just going to pass that along straight as what it is. The other problem that last year I had with Neem is it kind of did that to me too. and it never did that before, it would tend to leave the leaves wet and waxy. But oak leaves, I think you can see that kind of has a silvery, and in light, that kind of silver gray texture does look kind of sparkly a little. I mean, ever so fine, kind of like a satin finish. Probably microscopic trichomes or something reflecting light. But after you spray with neem and all of that dries, those water stains on the bottom of the leaves will, to me, also look like powdery mildew. That was one issue out of several that I had last year. So with the tree looking good, with the work that we've been doing, our foundation had turned into some twos, and our twos had turned into fours, and we were really happy with all of the foundation and all the viprication we were getting out of this tree. And then we started losing stuff to powdery mildew, and we started treating it. When I reached for my bottle, it hadn't been used in probably 4 or 5 months. And so 4 or 5 months, that bottle had been sitting there in the heat of August and the whole summer long, and probably a lot of the water. One thing, you have to shake it before using it. So the neem and the water would have separated. That's one. Two, they would have evaporated at different rates. Neem is oily and thick. Once it separates, it's almost a motor oil thickness. So once it's separated, it's not going to evaporate off. The water is. So over time, over the months, as the months went by, I grabbed my neem bottle, I gave it a couple of good shakes, and I hosed down that tree, and everything that I got dripping wet, which was the way I applied it, died, because I had just overdosed it with oil that had nowhere near enough water to go with it. So I had just added problems on top of problems and didn't know whether it was what I had just said. It took me a minute to figure that out. First I'm thinking the neem is ineffective, the powdery mildew is just stumping our butt. No, you just poisoned it with neem, basically, by overdosing it with something that had the wrong concentration. When I figured that out, it was kind of a couple of things. One, long after the neem should have dried off, like by that afternoon, the whole tree was still an oily, nasty mess, and the whole balcony smelled strong like a neem plant, like a neem factory. So I kind of figured out by the end of the day that might be. But at the same time, I was so freaked out by the powdery mildew. I'm like, I think I put that neem on there way heavier than I planned to. Hopefully that'll kick its butt. Well, it kicked my butt, and that would be a drawback to neem. Be careful how you use neem. It's not toxic. The idea behind it is it's not gonna kill our dogs or the neighbor's cats or rats or anything, or birds or anything else. There's nothing that eats the berries is gonna get sick. Nobody who picks up any or eats any of the foliage is gonna get sick and die. The other way to deal with powdery mildew is non-dishwashing soap. Non-dishwashing soap and a little bit of tap water. The neem, I would take that teaspoon right there, fill it up. I would put it in this bottle and shake it up. And every time I use it, I would shake it before using it. And if I gave it a good look, I would also probably see the neem floating on the top after a couple of days of not being shaken. It separates every time and needs to be reshaken before use. It does have a funny smell, but it's not a toxic smell. You probably smelled this before at the nursery at Home Depot, because a lot of those plants would have come from service industry dealers, and they would have been neeming, entire tables, greenhouses full of plants all at one time, because they're not messing around, and they don't, it's not known to be a cancer called an agent or any of that stuff. You could basically eat something that had been neemed, and it wouldn't hurt you or your animals or show up in your kids or none of that stuff. So the bright side is it won't hurt anybody. The bad side is if you get sloppy with it, you can make an oily mess out of your trees, and you can clog up all the stomas, I believe is is the correct term I should use, and it basically will shut down leaf production and will kill a leaf just as bad as what you were using it for. That's if you misuse it. But then a lot of things are like that too. And even when misused, it's not going to cause a problem down the line. Other things I've heard of people using on powdery mildew is I've actually heard somebody say that whenever I saw powdery mildew on something, I would stand out there, I would put it out in the middle of the yard with the water hose on a light spray, and I would wash it off. Yes, you can actually do that. It doesn't kill powdery mildew. You're just sending it down the street, and you're going to have to wash it a long way before before it makes its way down to the gutter. Anything other than that, and you're giving it water, which is exactly what it's all about, is sucking the water out of stuff, and you're just sending it to your yard or wherever you've washed it to. So that's the good and bad about that. I also mentioned peroxide can be used. The drawback to that to me is after you use it, it looks like powdery mildew. So it's kind of hard to know when you're done with it. The Dawn dishwashing soap is going to be what I go with on my Kodahan maples. In fact, I did yesterday. I used what I had left yesterday, and then today I decided we were going to do a show about that. And since we were going to do a show about that, that I would start over fresh. So I poured out last year's Neem. I'm going to remix that, and I'm going to remix that, and I can't do them one-handed. So I'm just basically going to tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and put a teaspoon of Neem in my Febreze bottle, and I'm going to put a couple of quick hot squirts of Dawn dishwashing in that larger tap water bottle, and give it a good shake. That also is good for insects and pests. Soap melts ectoskeleton, so that's how something like Dawn dishwashing liquid, which is food grade to humans and mammals and all that other stuff, is absolutely fatal to insects. Another thing when it came to insects and stuff, if my problem was spider mites, for instance, I would probably take that same cocktail of Dawn or that same cocktail of Neem and add a little cayenne pepper to that, which is what they make tear gas out of. And it's also a cooking ingredient, cayenne pepper. You'd find it at your in the cooking aisle in the spices, cayenne. And but in concentrated form, that's what tear gas is. And in a non-concentrated form, it still takes out anything with ice. So yeah, that's some pretty graphic ways of dealing with things that you might find frustrating in your garden. You can have the tactile joy of taking out their eyes or melting them. And that's just a little bit of spill about my go-to measures for. Okay. Let's just go a little heavier into that. Let's say, for instance, we're going to use the cayenne pepper. A lot of times, I wouldn't do just the tap water. Maybe tap water, Dawn dishwashing soap, 2% milk, cayenne pepper. Don't have cayenne pepper? Can't find cayenne pepper? I've heard people use Tabasco. Downside to that is you end up with something, if you walk in a room where you will have done that to your plants, it will smell like Tabasco and milk breath. That's the downside. Good side is it takes out most predators and will take out powdery mildew. Neem works great on powdery mildew in that it leaves your leaves waxy. It changes the composition of what's on the surface to something that the PM can't deal with. Same with the peroxide. It changes the pH to something that the powdery mildew cannot hang with. So that's kind of what those guys are and how those guys kind of do their thing. I'm not really concerned about Frida's dog treats being right next to the Neem or the Dawn dishwashing liquid. They are food grade items. So that is our little beautiful day spill. Within a few minutes, before I even upload this, I will have mixed that up and given that a little bit of a hosing, and we will go back over here and give a little bit of a hosing to our Dawn Redwood, and I've rotated it, and we're going to further encourage it just to push out and put out more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. Like and subscribe if you guys have not already. Our next drop will be when probably it could be Friday night, or it could be our Saturday video. But either way, we've got a beautiful Saturday probably coming up, and then Saturday Night Live, which is that thing we do on Saturday night. So I appreciate you, and Frida appreciates you, and thank you so much for watching.